Hey everyone, and welcome to Salt Project Community Open Hour for Thursday, July 20th. I am your Salt Project Community Manager and your host for this open hour. My name is Jimmy Chunga. Thanks for being here. We have a lot of stuff happening today. Pretty excited about it. We'll talk about it here in a second. Here's where you can find Salt Project. We're all over the place. YouTube, GitHub, Slack, Reddit, LinkedIn, of course, the Hacks Podcast. With Tom Hatch and yours truly, and Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I think Threads will be coming soon. Mastodon has been recommended. Will we do Mastodon? Assuming it survives long enough for me to get signed up, then yeah, sure. We'll go ahead and we'll do Mastodon as well. I know a lot of you like that. So watch for those coming soon on Threads and Mastodon.
Wow.
Let's see here. Yes,
Twitter,
yes, Tom.
Twitter might not be around long enough.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Yeah, that's true. So we'll be on all these things as long as they're around, and we'll be dispensing information that way. Here's what we're talking about today. We've got general updates, Salt Project user group meetups with our dude Nick Hughes. Also, Salt Project website continues to evolve. We'll talk about that. We've got a Docs working group milestone update with Alyssa Rock. A lot of stuff happening with the Docs working group, and I'm excited to have her tell all of you what's going on. We'll check in with our community forums with Thomas Phipps, and we've got a demo today with Gareth Greenaway, salt extensions. We're talking about salt extensions and then answering all your questions, because you will have lots of questions about Gareth's demo. All right, open hour every first and third Thursday, 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time. That's 11 a.m. to noon Mountain time, and then you can do your math as you work east there. Our next Salt Project Community Open Hour is going to be on August 3rd, Thursday, August 3rd. So we look forward to meeting up with you then. I'd also like to remind you to join a Salt Project working group. There's a whole bunch of them for you to choose from. We are rebuilding that page within our website. I'll get to that here in a second. But if you have an interest in the Mac OS working group or the Windows working group or formulas with Jeff Neal, thank you, Jeff, or Alyssa with the docs, there's a bunch of them. Be sure to hit us up on Slack, or you can just send me a message and say, hey, I'm interested in X, and I'll get you all set up. So just Jimmy Chunga on Slack, or schunga@vmware.com. Nick Hughes, former Salt Project Community Champion. I think he's won it multiple times, kind of like SpongeBob as the Employee of the Month. I think I've used that joke before, I'm sorry. Nick's our guy, we love him. He's putting together something called the Salt Project User Group Meetups. They're happening all over the country. They're single-day events with speakers, recorded sessions, food, networking. And if you'd like to find a Salt Project User Group Meetup in an area near you, you can go to Spugum. That's SPUGM, spugum.com. to learn more, or you can just hit Nick on Slack, either way, or me for that matter. Okay, as I was saying, I've kept this slide around from our last open hour. We have a new saltproject.io website. We've moved away from WordPress. It broke. We had all kinds of problems with it. So we have a new Hugo-based website. It's live. We are still adding stuff every single day. Thank you, Derek and Alyssa and so many others. We are continuing to populate that site with all kinds of stuff, i.e. the Salt Project Working Group page. So we're going to be making some changes in there. If you're looking for something and you can't find it, there are all kinds of other places where you can view different resources. So we've got Slack, of course, which I was talking about, Salt on GitHub, the Salt install guide, the Salt user guide, the VMware ARIA automation config. That's what config is that it's Salt Stack Enterprise is what that is. So you can search that out, and of course, Item Project at itemproject.io. There will be some stuff, some resources available to you there. Again, keep checking back to the site often. We have new blogs. We've got all of the hacks in there now, and we're working to get that set up for you. Thanks for your patience. All right. On that note, Alyssa's got some pretty incredible stuff happening with the Salt Project Docs working group. Alyssa, the time is yours, my friend.
Okay, so I just like to use the open hour to update our community on some major milestones from the Salt Docs working group. And I have 2 updates to give about our active projects. We have more projects than just 2, but just updating on 2 today. So first off, I want to celebrate a major contribution from a Salt Docs Working Group member. Her name is Gayatri Krishnaswamy. She just this week submitted a PR to make major improvements to the Windows Package Manager documentation. So just to give you some history, just to see how we do things here, this documentation project started with Caleb, who's a member of the core SALT team. I was talking to Caleb, who told me about some of the pain he was experiencing when he was first trying to get SALT working on his Windows box. So based on that conversation, I wrote up a card and added it to our backlog on the SALT Docs roadmap. And then when Gayatri joined our SALT Docs working group back in November, she saw that item in our backlog and it caught her attention as one she'd like to work on. Just for some context, Gayatri joined because she was job hunting and for a technical writing job and just wanted to get a little bit more experience with developer documentation to fill in a gap in her resume. So she worked really closely with me and Shane and the Windows working group to make these improvements. And not only did she recently submit that PR, but I also want to say it was a SALT project success story. She just got a job that started this week at OutSystems, and it's a developer documentation job. And she told me that she feels like her SALT Docs experience helped her get that job because she could showcase this work as part of her portfolio. So that's awesome, right? So I just really want to definitely say thank you to Gayatri because it's an excellent PR. She's been doing great work. And I also want to give a huge shout out to Shane and to the Windows working group. I think I saw, is it David here? Thank you for your support for Gayatri. This really was a team effort. And as a technical writer, I personally feel it's very important to celebrate non-code contributions to open source projects because they often go unrecognized, even though they're really crucial to the success of many projects. So great work, Gayatri, and to everyone on the team and the community who helped. We really appreciate that. So pivoting a little bit, speaking of non-code contributions that you all can make to the SALT project, I want to tell you about another project from a different working group member. Eileen Dominy is helping us to do user research about how we can improve the documentation. We've talked to many community members so far, some of you on the call, that's great. We're getting some really great feedback and research. However, we feel like we want to talk to a few more people who are either new to SALT or who have recently learned it and have experienced what it's like to be new and have that fresh on their mind, because you only get to be new once. So if you know somebody who recently started with SALT, maybe you have a team member that you recently helped train and get up to speed or something like that, let me and Eileen know about it. You can message us on Slack, or you can contact us in the SALT Docs working group channel, and we'll definitely get back to you. So we would just love to talk to some new people if possible. And that's it for me. Back to you, Chunga.
Oh, that's fantastic. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. You only get to be new once, and we'd love to learn from you as much as you can. Of course, if you're me, I've been new for like 3 years, but yeah, I would really love to get you with Alyssa and find out what your experience is like. We're learning volumes from this project that Alyssa's working on. So round of applause, not only for Alyssa, but for all of her folks there in the Docs project working group, or the Docs working group, sorry. Okay, next up on the, let me see here, Thomas Phipps from Community Forums. What's happening, Thomas?
Hey, excuse me. Just a simple one today. Had a user come in and he was only forwarding one port to the master over a VPN, and was wondering why the minion was connecting. He could do extremely basic stuff like see that it was coming in, but couldn't, actually send commands to the minion or anything like that. 4505 and 4506, well, 4505 does send information to the minion. The minion still does connect to the master for all of the connections. So it is required that every port needs to be incoming. The master does not connect to the minions directly. All minions connect to the master. And right now, that also means that if you're going to want to do things like load balancing, because there are 2 ports, and it's being worked on that both ports need to go to the same master in order to actually be able to function. Daniel's working on a patch to kind of loosen that up so you can, as long as the masters are talking to each other, you can have a backend that'll actually talk. But right now that's not there. So, but once that's done, you can actually create like a pool of masters but right now ports need to go to the same master for a minion, otherwise that communication link just isn't there.
Gotcha. Any questions for Thomas about this before we move on to Gareth's demo? No? All right, fantastic. Thank you, Thomas Phipps. Well done, sir. As always. All right, next up, Gareth Greenaway himself. He's generously volunteered his time to give us a demo on Salt extensions. There's a lot of buzz around this. We just came back from the Salt Summit in Utah. We probably should have talked a little bit about that. We'll get that on the next open hour. But this was something that we spent a lot of time discussing. It was there was buzz, I dare say. So Gareth, would you mind giving us a quick demo about Salt extensions?
Yeah, so before we get to that, and just a preview, the demo is, I think it's interesting, but it may not be super exciting because it's basically just, I tried to think of like, how can I demo what an extension is going to be? And it's basically running a Salt module, which I suspect many people on this call have done hundreds of times. So our goal with the extensions is to make that process, the actual act of running the what ends up being the extensions, as seamless as possible.
So I have a quick question for you here before we get
Sure.
started, though. So if you're a brand new Salt user, is this going to be something that's difficult, or can a brand new Salt user figure this out fairly quickly?
Our goal again is to make this as seamless as possible. So as a brand new Salt user, you will hopefully, and I'm sure the community will tell us if we get this wrong, but hopefully make this, this will be as easy as possible.
Gotcha. Okay.
But before we started, I kind of wanted to give some background because Alyssa had mentioned that there had been a little bit of buzz, and Chunga alluded to it too, as within the community Slack as well, a little bit of buzz and a little bit of concern about what the Salt extensions were going to be, and what that meant. So I just wanted to kind of go through answer some questions that we thought might be relevant, as well as kind of address some of those concerns. So like the first one off the top of the as we start, what exactly are Salt extensions? So Salt extensions, and we've already seen a few kind of pop up into the Salt Stack org, as well as our new org, which is community managed, community controlled, the Salt extensions GitHub organization. Salt extensions are Salt modules. Currently today, there are, I think, on the realm of like something around like 600 plus execution modules and roughly 400 state modules, as well as like a handful of other beacons, engines, whatnot. And they are in various states of functionality, and they have like tons of bugs and whatnot. For the Salt core team, that is way too many for us as a group to manage, to fix bugs. It slows down our releases, it slows down our testing, and for users that want to get and contributors that want to get fixes in, it also slows that down, because someone could fix a bug in a particular module and then has to wait for the next Salt release to go out. So answering the first question, Salt extensions are simply Salt modules that we are kind of going through and figuring out what we consider non-core that will get moved out into their own repositories, their own projects. And so the next question, and I kind of answered this a little bit, why move them to extensions? So we get the ease of getting those updates out for the extensions. We narrow what kind of the scope of what is considered Salt core. We get releases out quicker, we get tests out quicker, and ultimately we hope to improve the stability of the Salt project, as well as like those modules that are getting moved out. The next question that is likely on everyone's mind is what modules are getting moved out. And so they are, again, ones that we've determined that are non-core to the Salt project. So these are not necessarily required for the execution of Salt. So some modules that would be considered core are used in like just about every single module out there. So that would be like CMD, file. We're kind of thinking of like the package modules as right now as core. That might change in the future, but right now they're considered core because that is a core kind of usage of Salt. Jenga, if you could go to the next slide. And so next question is like how those modules will be moved out. So once we identify a module or collection of modules so that are going to get moved out to an extension, they will be migrated via a pull request of the Salt project. So all those modules will be updated with a deprecation warning. You may have seen that in some of the work that Nick Hughes has done with the Azure cloud modules. Similar deprecation warning anytime you use that. So we will follow our usual deprecation path of 2 releases. So any modules that we start to move out will get they will remain in the core project for 2 releases, and then after those 2 releases they will get moved out or removed from the project in favor of the extension. So any of that are begun to move out with like 3007 for example, will be ultimately removed from the project in favor of the extension in 3009. We're utilizing the tool that one of the core team members, Pedro, wrote called Salt Extension, and there's the GitHub URL for that. It's a really good tool, really handy tool for kind of creating a skeleton project for an extension. It's good for, like, we've used it for a few tools already. A few months ago, I did a demo of Salt Describe, which is an extension we wrote to kind of generate salt state files based on like a running system. And the initial kind of creation of that project was done using the Salt extension tool. So it'll create just everything you need, basic layout. So when we're moving these modules out into extensions, we will use this. We've been using this tool, and then we copy using various like GitHub Git tools to preserve the Git history, the commit history as much as possible into the extension, do all the magic of Git commits and everything, ensure the tests are passing, and then push them up to a new repository. And then once we do that, once the migration has happened, our plan is to move any open issues related to that module over to the new repository. Changa, if you could go to the next slide. Okay.
Give me one second. Did it move? Did I adjust it?
I think so. Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Yeah,
apologize.
Yeah, they're very, very similar slides in between.
Okay.
I should have put like a little like happy face or something to indicate the differences. So I kind of touched on this when modules will be moved. So this is going to be a long process. It's not going to be like an overnight thing or even like a 2 release thing, because as I said, there's many modules that currently make up the Salt project today, and many of those will likely get moved out to extensions. So as I said, like we're going to be starting this in 3007, and all those modules will stay in 3007. I think the one exception might be the one that Nick moved. I think it might get removed in 3007, just because it was one of the early ones that Nick did before we kind of mapped this out. We had the idea of salt extensions already, but in terms of like mapping out the ones that we wanted to move. So that one might get moved out in 3007 or 3008. But the process will begin in 3007 and follow our normal deprecation path of 2 releases. So deprecation warning in 3007, and then ultimately removed in 3009. And then where the modules will be removed. So I kind of touched on this one. So we've identified modules, and this is not set in stone. If someone sees like a module, and we'll try and publish the list, kind of the ones that we've categorized in the different categories. We'll try and publish it somewhere just so the community can weigh in on this. But this is definitely not set in stone. We've already kind of moved things around as we've been kind of discussing this amongst the team. But the projects, the modules that we kind of deem as core were remained within the SALT project. Any modules that we will, as a team, as the SALT core team, that we kind of deem as ones that we want to make sure remain outside of the project, outside of the core project, but still kind of under our management or our purview, will remain in the SALT organization, SALT stack organization, as new repositories. And then any other ones will get moved out into the community maintained GitHub organization, the SALT stack, or sorry, the SALT extensions organization. Next slide, Chinka. Okay, so these are just some of the examples. Some of these ones have already started to get moved out. So as I said, like what is considered core, CMD, config, file, and pillar, just some of the ones I tossed out from the list. I think right now, of the ones that are considered core, when I looked this morning, I think there was roughly 130 or so that right now are considered core. And I did see one of the comments fly by that the networking modules should be considered core. I think those were one of the ones that we, that we considered core right now. Networking package, at least the major commonly used package ones. So like the Yum apps, and those ones, the SALT managed ones right now. So 3 of them that have kind of been slated as the initial ones to get moved out. One was Vault, LDAP, and Docker. So just a little backstory on Vault. So one of our community members, I think his name is Jean-Luc. His GitHub handle is LCube. Did like some really amazing refactoring of the Vault modules, and that seemed to be like a good starting point, a good jumping off point for the Vault extension. So we spoke to him kind of offline and just asked him like, hey, would you be interested in your work being the basis of the extension, of the Vault extension? And he was definitely on board with it. So we right now we have a within the SALT managed, within the SALT stack organization, we have a Vault module that has been moved out that was the basis of his work. We're still waiting for approval to get that repository made public. Right now it's a private repository. VMware, which many of us work for, has some rules about creating new repositories. So we do need to get approval right now for those to be made public, but we are waiting for that to happen. But once that happens, that will be made as a public repo and installable over existing SALT installs. One of the reasons that this one was slated as a SALT managed repo or an extension, we know that this one is heavily used by many people in the community and many like enterprise users. So we wanted to make sure that like we could kind of keep an eye on things, just make sure it's stable. But at the same time, we wanted it outside of core, just because the development and the releases of Vault itself, HashiCorp's Vault project changes so quickly. that we didn't want the development or the maintenance of this extension, these modules, to be tied to the salt release, even though we are going quicker now with the salt releases, salt core releases. We wanted to be able to have this one be released quicker as well. The next one was the LDAP modules. Similar thought process behind this one. I know when we moved to first Tiamat and then RELN based builds, there were some issues with installing LDAP. So this one was decided to move out to an extension for many of those reasons. And this would allow us to kind of package existing or necessary Python libraries with that extension when it's released outside of the core. And then Docker, the Docker one was just a similar reasons as the Vault, just because the Docker releases were changing so quickly and frequently we're breaking the salt modules. So getting that one out in the extension, getting its release outside of the normal salt release just seemed like the best option there. And then the last four are going to be, there's some examples of community managed extensions. So I mentioned that Nick Hughes started that was one of the first community managed ones we did, was the Azure modules. So that's in that GitHub org. Proxmox was one that actually a community member approached us and said like, hey, I'd like to move this out as an extension, and did, which was great. The Zabbix one was one that we did as just kind of an example, a starting point. And then Prometheus, I believe, was also a community member, wanted to move this out. Was that you, Nick? Did you do that one?
That was me, and that was actually the first, like, I guess, native extension. I put in a PR against the core, and we were like, maybe this is a good extension, and we just moved it out before it even made its way into Salt.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that is right. Chunga, next slide, I think. Okay, I did have one more. Oh, okay, I was going to show just a quick look at like the demo of the extension. So if I could share my screen.
Yeah, that may be my fault there, Gareth, because it was just kind of blank, and then I realized as you're talking, oh, I wonder if this is the demo part, right?
The one that you removed.
If I screwed it up, I'm sorry. Here you go.
No worries. I think that was the one slide that was like slightly different than the other ones. It actually said demo in it.
Oh, did
all
it?
good.
Oh, crap.
I think it did. Oh well, that's all right. Let's see. Am I? Nope, I don't want to do that. Sorry. Zoom thought I wanted to leave the meeting. Okay. All right. So one of the things I wanted to show real quick was, and again, this is, I didn't want to show like running the modules just because that's not really exciting. But one of the changes, one of the things I wanted to show was one of the changes, and I forget what release this went into, but now when you run a Salt -- versions, you'll actually get a list of what extensions you have here. So you can see right now I've got the Salt Describe one, which I mentioned, and this other one, Salt Convert, which we will talk about in, I think, a few weeks. Not ready to talk about that one yet. But little teaser for it. So I have purposely, for my Salt install here on my laptop, I purposely removed or deleted the one of the Vault modules. So if I run a salt call -- local sys.doc and then Vault, normally this would show me the documents, the doc strings for all of the functions within the Vault module. But because I don't have that module anymore, it's gone. So here I am in the Salt extension, which I built out, again, using the tool. So this is the basic structure that you get. So you get the docs, you get your license file, your Knox file for running tests, basic README, any requirements, And then the source directory, which is the one we're probably most interested in, is going to be structured like so. So you've got source and then salt.txt, salt.txt underscore vault. So as far as naming conventions, just so it's easily searchable, we're trying to keep them all as best as possible. Some variants of salt.txt and then the name of the modules. So in this case, this one's the salt, or this one's all the vault modules. So like the execution module, the pillar, states. There's one more that I'm forgetting. SDB. And returners. So these are all the vault related modules that are getting collected into this extension. So if I look under vault, so this is the actual module that has been moved out from salt. And the only major difference between it is between the one that's in the or would have been in the salt project today, had we merged the PR from Jean-Luc, is the references to God, there's a lot of doc terms. The references to the imports. Oh, I missed it. So this one, instead of imports, salts, utils, and then vault, this one actually references the salt extension. So that's one of the changes that would have to happen as these things get migrated out. But now if I install this, and eventually, like, we will have, as these are pushed to like GitHub and the GitHub repositories, or published onto PyPy, you'll be able to just install them as pip projects. So now when I run the sysdoc, assuming that the live demo works, I will get the vault documentation for all the vault functions, because I have the module, the extension installed. And now when I do a version report, I have the salt.txt salt.txt vault installed, with the version auto-generated by Git. And that does conclude my very short, very exciting, I think, demo of an extension.
Hey, I thought it was great, right? Everybody,
Oh.
round of applause for Gareth. I thought it was fantastic. Good stuff.
I mean, as I
man.
said, you're running a salt module, which again, I suspect many of us have done hundreds and thousands of times. So, but that is our goal. Our goal is to make it so that it as you install these extensions, as we move stuff out from salt into extensions, that it is as seamless as possible. And cool. I saw the chat flashing as I was talking before, going through those questions. So if we have any questions, if anyone has any concerns, I guess we can read them out, or feel free to like come off mutes and let us have it. I suspect there's some opinions here.
It is a Q&A section. It was not a secret that we put. That was a very deliberate thing to put Gareth right next to the Q&A section, because we suspected a lot of you are going to have questions and comments. So fire away, and Gareth, if we don't have questions right off the bat, maybe you could read some of these off of the chat for our YouTube audience later on that we can answer.
Yeah, I saw Gary come off mute. Did you have a question or comment about this, Gary?
Yeah, I did. I was going to give you an opportunity to address the question in chat first, but I can go ahead. I'm going to forewarn you. This is going to be a bit of horse flogging. One of the big I guess challenges with salt extensions is discoverability. I know I've asked Pedro about this before, but do we have any progress on the salt extensions index?
No, but it is something we are definitely keeping in mind. As we start to move these out, you're absolutely right. We want to be able to make people know, not just like as we start moving like these projects out, but like the ones that I referenced, like the Salt Describe project, there's Salt Analytics, Heist is another good example. We want to make sure that people know that these modules and these extensions are out there. So definitely, we will have something that we're loosely calling like a extension marketplace, where people can go and discover them, as well as like see hopefully the current state of them, in terms of like one of the kind of pie in the sky ideas that I wanted was like to be able to see, like, for, I don't know, the vault extension, for example, like what is the current state? Does it work with 3007? Does it work with 3008? Does it work with like 3010? Like what versions is it tested against? So I know as a user, when I install this, it should work with the version of Salt that I'm using.
If I may be permitted a second question.
Yeah.
So I've completed one extension, taken a stab at a few others. The Salt extension tool for creating extensions is somewhat challenging to work with and a bit buggy. I'm wondering if there's one of the, for example, it by default you can't commit right away, so you make some changes, and then it actually creates conflicting documentation that keeps trying to overwrite each other. And I think one of the biggest challenges is there's no CI to actually have it like as part of the PR process to actually have it attempt to generate an extension. Is there going to be any push to try and do something like that in the CI for that repo? Because the problem is we can make changes, but then until you actually run the extension to actually generate, until you run the package to actually generate an extension, which the CI doesn't currently do, you don't know if you've broken something else. So it's very difficult to try and make changes and understand what's changed, and then not break something else.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to answer the first question, I think if I heard that right, the Salt extension tool is buggy and has some issues. I've actually ran into that. I think many of the bugs that you might be thinking about in the last month or so, and submitted PRs that have been merged since. So I suspect many of them might be addressed. And if you run into more, definitely, but yeah, let us know, or submit PRs into it to get those fixed. I'm not 100% sure I understood the second question. If you wouldn't mind kind of clarifying.
So the actual CI for the actual CI/CD pipelines for the Salt extensions, for the Salt extension tool, don't actually attempt to have it build an extension. So the problem is when you go to make changes to the Salt extension tool, trying to fix bugs, you may introduce others because it's not actually testing building an extension. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it now. Yeah, that is, yeah, we should have a test in the Salt extension tool repo that actually builds an extension. Yes, 100% agree. That's a fantastic idea.
Awesome. That's all I had. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gary.
Just to pile on to the Salt extension tool and the state of bug fixes, I think it should be in a fairly good state because, as Gareth mentioned, we had a community member come in and say like, hey, I'd love to contribute to Salt Cloud, specifically Proxmox. And I asked them like, hey, would you be interested in taking a stab at creating that as an extension? And Martin Thibault, hopefully that's a correct pronunciation of his last name. He did a great job, right? Like he just rolled out the extension, didn't have to check in with us too much on that, and then immediately started putting in some bug fixes and features against that extension, which we were able to roll out really quickly. So that's been a pretty good success story about somebody just sort of coming in green and being able to use it.
Yeah. I mean, and there's definitely definitely room for improvement there. But I mean, it's like any open source project, any other salt extension, any salt module. The more people who use it, the more bugs we find, the better we make it and improve it. Just to reiterate, and I see Nick answered the question, Hunter's question about related modules. So we are trying to, as we hopefully saw with the Vault modules there, we're trying to group them as best as as much as possible. So if there's a module, an execution module that is a candidate for an extension, its corresponding state module will also be part of that extension. And if there's utils or anything else, SDB, returners, whatever, they will get moved out. One of the candidates, which I've actually been eyeing for a while because it's been in many ways a thorn in my side of managing it, is the MySQL modules. And then there is like various, and the Postgres ones for that matter. There are various other modules, other types of modules that are considered related to those. And so all of those would get moved out into like a MySQL extension or a Postgres extension. Just looking through questions. Yeah, so we talked about the registry or marketplace or whatever we come up with. Salt Cloud. So using like Salt Cloud as an extension, I could see a lot of them getting moved out. Maybe not necessarily or maybe it would, I don't know. We'd have to discuss it, and we definitely value community inputs on that. I could see like individual Salt Cloud modules getting moved out into extensions, and then the kind of basis of Salt Cloud remaining in core, or being like its own like salt managed, like within like the salt stack org as an extension. I don't know, like a lot of this stuff is all very fluid. Nick, did you have comments? I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, so individual clouds, and whether they be execution modules, any sort of cloud technology, right? Will definitely be moved out, right? Like it makes a lot of sense to move them out as extensions, so that's definitely going to happen. As far as Salt Cloud itself, the reason I said that it's possible that Salt Cloud might come out as its own component is because I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe it was right after the VMware acquisition, there was like a stub repo that was created, like went through the VMware repo creation process. And that was supposed to be the repo for Salt Cloud getting moved out, but there was no work done on it. And that was sort of like towards the end of when we were having cloud working group meetings and things like that. It might make sense to resurrect the cloud working group meetings if there's a big push for people wanting to help move out cloud modules, just so that we could check in with them and say like, hey, how's it going with this Salt extension? Here's the steps that you need to do in order to move it out. And I guess just for point of reference, right? Like this is a great job for folks who are maybe new to Salt, new to development in general, who want to contribute to open source project. You can just come in, you can follow some steps, moving stuff into an extension, and basically create a whole new cloud capability from scratch by just sort of like moving files over. So it's not terribly hard to just like move things into an extension, other than checking to make sure that all of the associated testing and stuff works too, which I have a question about once this sort of moves to its next phase of questioning, I guess.
Nick, we can talk further about the cloud working group thing. I frankly, I love that idea. So we can talk offline about that, you and I,
Okay.
and see what that looks like, see what that would entail. And yeah, is there anybody else on this topic? If not, then we can go ahead and just shift. Nick, you can shift to your next question. While
Just
you've
a
got
quick, yeah, no, just a quick comment to build on what Nick said. I think I honestly do think the Salt Cloud modules are the individual modules for like AWS, and I mean, Nick already moved out the Azure one, but for Google Cloud or whatever other ones exist are actually perfect candidates for extensions, just because their development has been often like slowed because of like the larger Salt test base, code base and release cycle. So having those out in their own kind of repositories, their own projects that they can get brought into to Salt installations via PIP or whatever other means, I think will be great.
Okay, anybody else on the extensions topic? No? Nick, go ahead with your next round, man.
Yeah, it's still somewhat related, right? So we talked a little bit about the CSCD for the Salt extensions. For the cloud modules in particular, we had integration tests that were running in when it was in the core, which have since been disabled because we don't have a cloud account attached to it. And I guess we need to start thinking about what that framework's going to look like, right? Like, if we want to do integration tests for Azure or AWS or whatever, right? Like, how do we hook up those cloud accounts such that we can actually test those things against the actual API and make sure that things are still running well? The other part of it that's kind of related as well is like documentation, right? So there's documentation that's part of the Salt extension framework, but it doesn't like natively publish anywhere. So like if there's some sort of way that we can get some standardization there, I think I've talked with Alyssa and Derek about this in the past. As far as like formatting, making sure everything looks pretty and stuff like that, making sure that there's standardization of how it's implemented. And then, the documentation references are probably going to have to be part of the marketplace for extensions so that folks can access multiple extensions documentation from a single location. So just sort of throwing that stuff out there because they're going to become more pertinent as this initiative grows.
Can I respond to that last bit about documentation, if that's all right? I
Absolutely.
totally agree, of course, with everything that you're saying, Nick. And one thing that's exciting is we do have an ongoing project for the just standard module documentation that I think would be able to lend some support to the community as they're building out the documentation for this. So in terms of the content, I'm not talking about the tooling right now, but the content, we have a Salt Docs working group member who's working on building out templates for effective module documentation. It's still a work in progress and we'll definitely workshop it with the community, but hopefully like with these templates, we'll give people a really nice way to just kind of know what information we expect them to fill out to have high quality documentation for the extension. And it kind of helps guide them a little bit in terms of how to do that. And then we also hope to create a few high quality examples of those templates in action so people can see an example of what good is. So that's purely on the content side. When it comes to the tooling side, that's where I'll defer to Derek, but it's something I am concerned about too, especially on the hosting side. But I think we still need to work out those logistics.
Yeah, I would also say that has gets tied into like the discoverability of these extensions too. We want to make sure that as you're browsing the salt documentation, you could easily see the documentation for these other modules, these other extensions. That way they're not like forgotten about. They're easily found.
Awesome. Okay, we're very quickly approaching time. Does anyone else have any further questions?
I have one quick question, if I may.
Sure, go for it.
So back in, I think it was the May 18th open hour, DWAS did a demo on scaling jobs across multiple masters. I know one of the asks coming out of that was, for documentation on the setup and how he did it. Have I missed that, or has that been produced, or is it still forthcoming?
I don't believe DWAS is here on the call, but I can definitely reach out to him and see if he's got that, Gary. And if not, then I'll be sure to let him know, and I'll get with Alyssa, and together with DWAS, we can sort that out for you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I haven't heard any updates on that, but we can check in with him.
As I understand, it is still under development and finalization. So
So work is happening on it though, which is great, right?
I asked
So-
him about it last week and he's still, that's still being planned. He's still working on it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, at least it hasn't been forgotten.
no,
Awesome sauce. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and I appreciate you keeping us honest, Gary. I love that. So make sure you keep pinging us on that if you don't see it. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, can I squeak in under the wire?
Sure, go for it.
So I threw a Slack thread in the chat, and basically it was me and Mr. Thomas Phipps discussing check CMD standardization. So in file managed, we have check command functionality that's kind of like different than what the requisite produces. And we've had some folks ask for similar functionality in file.serialize to be able to, like, I don't know, maybe like do a JSON check on some serialized JSON or something like that after the fact. And we could certainly cobble together workarounds, but it would be nice to have something that is like a first party citizen in that type of workflow. So the broad question is, like, how do we move forward in a way that allows us to have that type of functionality, I guess on a broader type of implementation. One of the things that I threw out there in response to Thomas was like, hey, maybe we have like a pre-check requisite that has functionality that's closer to how it works in file.managed, because the difference between the two, the main problem is that the requisite is a post check, while the file.manage check command allows it to sort of roll back and not fudge up a file and leave it in a bad state, right? So, if there's some way that we can move forward on that, I can write the code. I just need somebody to tell me, like, hey, what's the right way to do this? Does it require a SEP? How do we get this done?
Anyone? Yeah, Jace, go for it.
Is this something different than like an unless or an only if? Is that what you're?
So,
are you
I mean, it's a separate requisite potentially, right? But yeah, it's.
Do we lose you, Nick? I think we lost Nick.
You lost me?
Yeah, we lost you there for a sec. Can you try it again?
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be, in the same vein as it, but sort of allow that hey, I'm running this state. I have this check that's going to be performed on potentially like a temporary file, and then it's not going to move forward with replacing the file contents if that check fails, right? Like that's the functionality that's needed, specifically on file.serialize, but potentially with other, other modules in general.
Well, the reason I ask is because I tend to use only if for that purpose.
I mean, that would be a workaround though. Like it wouldn't be within a single state.
I don't follow you.
So let's say we have a file.managed state, right? Your only if would be testing something prior to running that that file.managed, right? So like you're assuming at that point that something is in place that you can check. So if you have a state that writes to a temporary file, and then you have an only if that checks to make sure that succeeded before putting it in its actual spot, you can absolutely work around that way, but you're doing it in two states.
Okay.
Right. So I guess what people are asking for is file.managed has a check command functionality, but it's different than the requisite check command functionality. And so when a PR was put in, it looks like it was in October of 2022. Basically, it was shot down to add it into file.serialize as well, because there should be standardization across more than just those two modules. So that's why I'm asking, like, what's the best way forward? How do we get this type of functionality as a first party citizen so that we only have to write one state with a check command parameter or a check command requisite?
Okay, so this is a post command, not a pre command like I was referring to.
So what I want is a pre-command, like what is currently present in file.managed.
And I'm wondering if this bears a larger discussion, Nick, where maybe you can reach out to Jace or, other core team members on Slack and see if we can't set up a sidebar, for lack of a better term, where you guys can discuss this further if you need to.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it in that Slack thread that I posted. It was 9 days ago in develop, if you want to go look for it.
A subcommittee. Yeah, that's right, Hunter. Thank you.
But
sorry, Nick.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a way forward, right? So like if somebody can give me some guidance on like what the general consensus is on getting something like that in, that'd be awesome.
So is it, if I'm hearing this right, Nick, is it kind of what check command does for file.manage, but more on like a global like state, right?
Yeah, that's what if you look at the discussion on the PR, that's kind of what the consensus was there, right? Like, there should be this functionality that we currently have on file.managed everywhere, and then we can, potentially like deprecate that parameter on file.managed, right? Just so that there's like standardization across many modules. I'm sort of paraphrasing Thomas, so if you want to use your actual words, go for it.
Okay. Anyone else? We're good. We're over time. We're dropping people. So I want to try and wrap this up, but I don't want to leave anybody hanging. If there's anything else.
I'll talk all day, man.
Thanks, Nick. You're the man. Nothing else? Okay. Go once, go twice, 3 times. Good. I went through that pretty quick. Shane, time is yours, my man. Play us out.
Thank you, Jimmy. I watched a documentary on beavers. It was the best damn show I ever saw.
Funniest part about that is you calling me Jimmy. Thanks, man. That's good stuff. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to be a part of the Salt Project Community Open Hour. Again, the next one is, I believe it's August 3rd. And in the meantime, everybody head to Slack, and you can get your questions answered there. You can hit me up directly, Jimmy Chunga on Slack, or schunga at VMware.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for being here.